Hello and welcome to the DFS Power Hour podcast. I'm your host, John Proctor, joined by my co-host, Ryan Hodge. Today we are joined by Mike Tagliere of Fantasy Pros. We're going to talk some wide receivers based off of MFL10 ADP. And I just want to note that I pronounced Mike's last name correctly, I believe. And if Scott were still hosting, we would be joined by Mike Tagliere today. I am 100% certain.
You are 100% correct. I've heard Scott say my name before, and he definitely would have said it wrong. So props to Johnny.
So, Hodge, dude, how you doing?
I'm doing good, man. Just another day until preseason, so we're getting close.
Yes. And if you are listening and you haven't heard us talk about the preseason package yet, check out powerpod.com. The preseason advice that we gave last year will not be free this year. So if you want to see it again, it's definitely worth what we're charging. Check it out. So, Mike, first thing I want to jump off with before we really get into wide receivers is that, and I think this is sort of a wide receiver question. Now that we have this weird stuff going on with Zeke, are there any wide receivers that you have decided, at least recently, that you are going to start taking over him in, MFL10 drafts, best ball drafts?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, before this news even broke, I was taking an Antonio Brown over Ezekiel Elliott. Like last year, we undervalued the running back position. I actually came out with a strategy at some point saying you could do the zero wide receiver strategy and be okay. And, it's kind of flip-flop this year where if I got the number 4 pick in an MFL draft, I was like doing like jumping jacks, like high-fiving my wife, my child, because I got Antonio Brown at number 4, and I was more than happy with that. Like, if someone took Antonio Brown at number 1, I wouldn't even fault him, because if you go back before 2016 season, Antonio Brown outscored all the running backs by, I think it was over 50 PPR points. So, it swings one way, it swings the other. But with this news, I've actually bumped up Odell Beckham and Julio Jones above Zeke with the threat that there's a 1 or 2 game suspension. If we hear it's 3 or 4, Zeke's out of the first round for me. But as of right now, I'm comfortable taking Zeke at right around that number 7 range when most people are trying to decide between Mike Evans and AJ Green or even LaShawn McCoy. That's where I'd probably take Zeke right now.
Hodge, you worried about this stuff? It's weird, man.
Yeah, I could probably just echo what Mike said there. I was kind of going through my rankings over at Fantasy Pros, which is where I publish them, which is Mike's home site. And I ended up moving Zeke down a lot with the assumption of a 4-game suspension. I actually have him at the back end of the first round. So I have guys like McCoy, ODB, Evans above him now. And that's with the assumption of a 4-game suspension. The minimum is 6, I believe, for a domestic violence or abuse like that, according to Goodell. And I think what's important here is that with the whole, obviously the Deflategate thing, Tom Brady's suspension wasn't necessarily over a specific amount of PSI. Tom Brady's suspension was a Roger Goodell ruling. It was as simple as that. And I think that's just what is important to keep in mind here with Zeke, is that he could really be looking at 4 games, and it could be as simple as that. So that's what I have baked into my current rankings on fantasypros.com, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, and I saw Marcus Mosher tweeting some stuff about like up to a half season suspension. I mean, this kind of stuff. The conversation has gotten really strange. And then, everyone says, well, the speeding ticket's no big deal. His friend punching a DJ is no big deal. Him bailing on interviews is no big deal. But it's more of like the totality of the issues in that if you are pissing off the NFL and you are hurting their product, like that hammer could be coming. So,
yep, agreed.
Do you guys recall, but real quick, do you guys recall it was maybe 3 years ago, Des Bryant? Do you remember that whole thing where there was a video outside of a Walmart or something like that everybody was saying that Des was going to get suspended? There was video that was going to be leaked and this and that. Nothing ever came of it. So, I know that Cowboys, they obviously have a target on their back. There's no secret about that. Zeke shouldn't be putting himself in a situation where it's even questioned. What Dallas did after that with Dez is they started surrounding him with bodyguards, and they like kind of put a curfew on him, which I'm guessing the same thing is coming Ezekiel Elliott's way. So I'm not going overboard just yet. I did see that Mosher tweet in terms of saying draft Darren McFadden in like the 6th or the 7th round of your fantasy draft. I am not even close to doing that yet. But it's something we should pay attention to for sure. But at the same time, we still haven't heard the NFL say anything about it.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And it's all assumptions right now. Mm-hmm. So I think the more stupid stuff and the more weird stuff we see, the more likely it is of a suspension at all. But I think none of us have any idea how long he's going to be suspended. But with that being said, I agree with you guys. AB, OBJ, Julio, I'm fine taking over him. I'm still probably taking him over Evans and Green for now. But let's get into I want to talk some polarizing players. The first 5-6 guys are, fairly set. The first 5, AB, Beckham, Julio, Evans, Green. But then we have Jordy, Michael Thomas, and T.Y. Hilton that sort of round out the first 8 wide receivers. And I'm okay with Jordy and T.Y., but Michael Thomas is somebody who's really polarizing for me. Mike, are you okay with the way 6, 7, and 8 rounds out, or how do you feel about Michael Thomas?
I have Michael Thomas actually ahead of Jordy, and I know that's not a popular take, but as the season went on with Jordy Nelson, we kind of seen signs of what Larry Fitzgerald has been the last few years. He had the lowest yards per reception of his career, basically since he's become a starter, and some people tied that to the ACL, but as the year went on, I actually tracked that too. I went back and looked, and I figured maybe it was coming off the ACL, and he was just missing the step in the start of the season. I know Matt Harmon did some work with Next Gen Stats where it basically said yards of separation, and Jordy wasn't creating separation to start the season. But as the year went on, his yards per reception actually kept going down. So they kept using him a little bit more over the middle of the field. With Martellus Bennett coming there, it's going to change the dynamic of that offense a little bit. Ty Montgomery can obviously catch passes just as good as any of the wide receivers can. There's Randall Cobb should bounce back a little bit. Devontae Adams, took a step forward. There are so many question marks in that Green Bay offense. And I'm not saying that Jordy Nelson shouldn't be drafted as a wide receiver 1, but Michael Thomas, what he did last year was kind of remarkable. He didn't start until week 3. And if you kind of go back and you take his numbers from week 3 forward, even though he missed a game in between there, I think again it was against the Bucks. He finished as I think it was a top 6 fantasy wide receiver from the time he became a starter. So some people are concerned about the fact that the Saints, Michael Thomas is going to see a top tier corner every single week and this and that when Brandon Cooks was there last year. That doesn't really change with Sean Payton's offense. What he does with the offense is different than any other offensive coordinator in the game. And that's why I'm okay with Michael Thomas. They'll move him around. They will create mismatches. They'll move Kamara in there if they have to. Willie Snead's role doesn't change very much with Brandon Cooks being gone. I just think Michael Thomas becomes a more movable chess piece in the offense. And, replacing Brandon Cooks with Ted Ginn is not really going to do anything. Kobe Fleener, sure, bounce back, but projecting the Saints offense is pretty easy. You go year over year and it's just like clockwork. So Michael Thomas being the number 1 there, he's the most dependable wide receiver, I think, there. And Jordy Nelson coming up on, I think, age 33, wide receivers start to drop off, or age 32 maybe. Wide receivers start to drop off right around that territory. So they're all solid. I'm okay with all of them, but I think Michael Thomas is the one I actually prefer.
Do you have any concerns that sort of the Drew Brees, Peyton offense has never really produced like a top 5 wide receiver because of the way they spread the ball around?
I think it also comes down to the personnel that they've had. Marcus Colston was almost primarily a slot receiver. He was actually labeled as a tight end. I'm sure you guys recall if you've been playing fantasy for a long time. He was labeled as a tight end, wide receiver to start, and he was like primarily the slot. And some people have compared Michael Thomas to Marcus Colston. I don't think it's a fair comparison because Michael Thomas was not primarily a slot receiver. Willie Snead was playing the slot quite a bit. They had Brandon Cooks going inside there. Kobe Fleener lined up there some of the time. So Michael Thomas is a completely different receiver. And if you look at Jimmy Graham, his target numbers compared to any other tight end that's played with Drew Brees, he obviously targeted Jimmy Graham more than any other tight end because, the talent level was there. And Michael Thomas, if anything, last year, he just proved that he is a alpha dog in an offense, and he earned more targets than Brandon Cooks, and that's the reason that the Saints felt comfortable to ship him out.
Hodge, you got any concerns about Michael Thomas?
No, I think some people kind of hasn't produced a top 5 wide receiver in X amount of years as far as New Orleans goes. I think it's important to argue that his role will increase while, nobody's seen a 20% market share in that offense. I think with the amount of attempts that Drew Brees throws, that 20% kind of equals a 23, 24% in another in a standardized offense where they're not throwing the ball as much. To the Jordy Nelson point, dude saw 29, 30 something targets within the 20 last year. And I mean, Eric Decker saw like 28 the year prior to that, and that was leading all receivers in 2015. So I think the red zone targets will have to come down just due to natural regression, right? I don't think he's going to see another 30 targets with inside the 20. So I honestly think you're splitting hairs there. Gun to my head, I'm going to take Jordy, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if those two flip-flop.
Yeah. I whether it's overblown or not, I just have concern over a second-year guy taking over the number 1 role. I mean, obviously, it's just like hyperbole. There's no real, numbers to back that.
I mean, Thomas did have a really high catch rate. He was pushing an 80% catch. I think it was like just above 75%. So like that's a little high. Like that has to come down and normalize a little bit. But once again, I still think you're really splitting hairs there. So,
though I think I could be wrong, but I believe Drew Brees has always produced historically higher catch rates than some other quarterbacks,
yes.
like especially his running backs. So I don't know if he just throws a more catchable ball, but maybe it comes down a little bit. But I mean, I do think that Thomas probably sees more than 120 targets this season, but I don't know if that's enough to pay off his ADP. His ADP just sort of scares me.
So to the ADP discussion, I'll take Willie Snead at the end of the 5th or whatever it is over Michael Thomas at the beginning of the 2nd. I think when, if you want to actually look at a value-based drafting or something like that.
And it's, for me, I do like Michael Thomas and I have him in my top 12. I think I have him 10th, but it just ends up that where I have him ranked, I end up not getting him at all. When you're doing MFL10s, Mike, are you taking him there?
I ended up with a lot of Michael Thomas. He, I almost always get him at the start of the 2nd round. So if I have a pick anywhere from 9 to 12, typically I have Michael Thomas on my team because I have him as my number 6 receiver. I have him in front of Jordy. I have him in front of Ty. And, Ryan talked about it, splitting hairs. When you're trying to make a decision like this, like what I typically look for in the first 2 rounds, I want a guy that's not going to hurt my team. And I know that Michael Thomas, if he's on the field with Drew Brees, he's not going to hurt my team. It's the same thing with Jordy Nelson. But here's the thing. The Packers offense is going to regress in terms of pass attempts. Like Aaron Rodgers threw, I think it was 40 more attempts than he ever has in his career last year. And it had to do with their historically bad defense. So in terms of Michael Thomas, Drew Brees, we have a history of 650 pass attempts out of Drew Brees. Like we know what's coming there. We know that Drew Brees throws 32 touchdowns every single season. So if you're looking at 32 touchdowns, how can you divvy up the touchdowns and not give Michael Thomas at least like minimum 8 touchdowns? Like that's at minimum. I think 12 touchdowns is a realistic scenario for Michael Thomas, whereas Jordy Nelson, in terms of red zone efficiency last year, Jordy Nelson was atop the league. Like he's due for some regression. And on top of that, like I mentioned, the names coming up around him, the offense changing, maybe a regression in pass attempts. It's just enough with his age for me to bump him slightly down.
I mean, yeah, and that's a fair point. And I think Jordy is sort of that guy in the first round that we're sort of just waiting for him to fall off.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think, an argument, I'm not making this argument, but I think an argument can be made that there's a possibility that he's healthier this year after, a full season coming off of an injury. But he is a year older, so I get it. I get the concern. And Jordy's a guy that you can, if you want him as sort of your fifth, sixth, overall wide receiver, you're pretty much going to get him every time in the first round. But he's not a guy I would want to have, 30% exposure to,
right,
in MFL 10s. And now, so a guy who I think we might be a little more in agreement on. With Amari Cooper sort of going as like the 9th or 10th overall wide receiver. I'm probably, other than like when I'm like hungover and I time out and draft Amari Cooper, I'm probably gonna have 0 Amari Cooper shares. Are either of you guys in on Cooper as the 9th overall wide receiver in redraft?
I'll let Ryan go first.
As the 9th overall, no, I have him 12th currently ranked, and give me Keenan Allen over Amari Cooper.
Oh no. I am like anti Keenan Allen. But Amari, he's a tough cookie to crack, man. Once you get outside, we mentioned that tier of wide receivers, the Michael Thomas, the Jordy Nelson, T.Y. Hilton. Once you get outside that tier, you're in a different range. Like the number 9 through the number 20 wide receiver could almost be interchangeable. And I think, and Amari Cooper's obviously in that group, if he has some slight touchdown progression in his career, things change. It's tough. I'm a huge Amari Cooper fan, and I will be a fanboy. And I don't want to do that because it's tough to defend a guy that hasn't produced in the red zone. But to be fair, Derek Carr, I can't remember who it was. It was someone from MFL.com I was talking with, and they showed me a chart of Derek Carr as he goes down the field, like from his own end zone to the 20-yard line is this much. And as he moves down the field, Derek Carr gets worse and worse and worse. So it's not really all on Amari Cooper. So obviously Michael Crabtree overcame that last year, but people seem to forget that Michael Crabtree scored 13 fantasy points in the red zone in 2015. So it can go one way or the other. Like it's a very hit or miss thing. Amari Cooper put on some weight this offseason. He's better in best ball. I don't think I would draft Amari Cooper as the number 9 wide receiver in a redraft league. But if you're in best ball, Amari Cooper's been extremely hit or miss with Derek Carr, and I think that's a product of Derek Carr. So for me, I like him better in best ball. But who are you drafting him over? Or who are you drafting over him? And I mean, I heard you say Keenan Allen. I'm not close there. The players that I would consider over Amari Cooper there are, I guess Des Bryant, but I can't stand his schedule. I would consider Doug Baldwin and Sammy Watkins, but I don't need to take Sammy Watkins in that territory. I can get Sammy Watkins around later, and I'm happy with that. So I don't know. It's just that gray area. I usually take a running back in that territory, though.
Yeah, I'm definitely usually taking a running back. I would take probably Demaryius Thomas over him as well, just in the 1,000 yards every year. I'm just going to get it. And not in the sense that like I would rather have Demaryius Thomas than Amari Cooper straight up. It's just that he's so much cheaper on ADP. He's going like 11 picks later, and I don't think they're that far off. And sort of similar to Cooper and a Watkins, or an Alshon Jeffrey, though the new offense. I don't think they're that far off, which is why I'm just going to take a running back, and then I'll take the next wide receiver that's available. On that. And, with Cooper is a guy who I struggle with in redraft as well. I much prefer him as a DFS play when he's facing like some abysmal cornerback. And I will never forget. So, Mike, last year there was the week that Jameis Winston was the chalk. And there were maybe 3 or 4, I guess you want to call us touts out there who preferred Derek Carr in the Raiders-Bucks face-off as the top quarterback play of the week. And Hodge, were you there as well on Carr?
Dude, I totally made a bet against you.
Oh yeah, and
That's
I won.
the only reason why I remember.
And so like that night I made 50 Carr to Cooper stack lineups, and then I got really drunk, and none of them made it onto my DraftKings actual teams. They were just my 50 placeholder teams instead. So I'll never forget missing probably the best game from Cooper we're going to see in like 2 years, 3 years. So, there's a little bit of sting on that makes me never want to pick him. But I do agree that he's sort of a boomer bust player, and I can't do it. I mean, even in redraft or even in best ball, I just think I have to wait for Cooper to, take over that red zone role. That's the main concern for me, is that Crabtree still seems to be the primary red zone wide receiver.
He's still due for some mad regression though. I just pulled it up. So Crabtree 55.7 red zone points last year. That was 37.1% of his fantasy points. 37% in the red zone. Meanwhile, Amari Cooper scored it was under 9 fantasy points inside the red zone. If Amari Cooper on his 15 red zone targets, if he would have been average, like if he would have just caught the average, which is I think 1.98 fantasy points per target inside the red zone, he would have finished as the number 9 fantasy wide receiver. I mean, all in all, he finished as the number 12 fantasy receiver. And if you're projecting him to at least take a step forward in his career, and, I've compared him to like a young Bolden, like a better version of Anquan Bolden in terms of he does so many things. Amari Cooper has better speed than Bolden did, and that's why I like him a little bit more. I would say that Amari Cooper is already a top 3 route runner in the game. It's just a matter of the red zone. Do they design plays for them? They've talked about it this offseason. So, like I said, we've already seen him finish as a number 12 fantasy wide receiver, despite the fact that he scored 5 touchdowns. He was the only receiver to finish top 15 with less than 6 touchdowns. So if we get any sort of progression in his career there, Amari Cooper is honestly, like in Dynasty, I think Amari Cooper is being a little undervalued. And I know some people are like, wait, Mike, he's like the number 7 or number 8 wide receiver. I think he should be like number 4. I think Amari Cooper's that good. And Crabtree's still there, sure, but I'm expecting like regression to the mean, where like Crabtree should come back down to earth, and Amari Cooper should at least come back up to where his talent level says he should be.
That is hands down the best Amari Cooper take I think I've had somebody say. So that was very well put.
Appreciate that, Ryan. I gotta stand up for my guy there. Like I love Amari. That's the next helmet I'll be getting, actually.
Hell yeah,
dude. Yeah. I am a big Amari fan, and I agree with you on Dino, but he's still someone who I think is going a little too high for.
You're not getting a discount on him. That's the part that sucks.
Yeah.
For sure. I completely agree with you there. You're not getting a discount, and that's the part that hurts.
But you're not overpaying for him at the position. Sorry to beat a dead horse, but like there's no discount. But like what you just said, he's totally fine to go at that spot if you actually think he has top 6, top 5 wide receiver potential, which he clearly does.
Right.
So,
yeah, it's just that he falls in that same category with like the beginning of the second round running backs that are just so much easier to take. Devontae Freeman's.
He will outperform Demaryius Thomas, and
I agree 100%. I think Demaryius Thomas. I wrote a player profile on him. I said that why draft Demaryius Thomas in the 3rd round when you can get Pierre Garçon like much later, and they're going to give you very, very, very similar production.
Well, that's why I just want to take both. I like these wide receivers that just seem to be falling, and I'm not quite sure why they're falling. And we'll definitely get to Pierre Garçon. I think we all agree on Dez. I think he has moved up in ADP. At one point, he was like the 14th or something wide receiver, and I think that was a really great spot for him. But now that he's moved into the top 9 or 10, not really all that excited about him. Are either of you guys like excited about him? If not, we can move past him.
I love Dez as a player. I don't think he's done. I think that he's going to be a buy in Dynasty after he sucks this year. And I don't mean to say sucks like that, but in terms of what people are expecting, he's not going to live up to it. And that's sad because I love Dez Bryant. 10 of his 16 games are against like top 12 NFL cornerbacks. And some people have told me like, Mike's strength of schedule, that changes year over year and you can't rely on that. I didn't rely on that for wide receivers. Cornerbacks don't go from great to bad. Like that doesn't happen unless you're like Cortland Finnegan or something. But if Dez can overcome that in certain matchups, but when you have 10 of your 16 games against top 12 cornerbacks, like it's going to be extremely tough. We saw him struggle last year against, there was a few cornerbacks. You go back to the last time he played Richard Sherman. He's going to struggle against Patrick Peterson. He's going to go to Atlanta. Atlanta's going to work with him. Like the Giants, he was awful against the Giants last year. They literally shut him down to nothing. Josh Norman is going to shadow wide receivers this year. Washington's already said that. And Josh Norman gets inside wide receivers' heads, and Dez, if you get inside his head, the game's over. Like Dez might as well be useless at that point. There's just so much. I love Dez, the player, but it's too much of a small sample size in the NFL to bet on him this year.
I agree. Hodge, you got any other input?
His catch rate's a little bit down, and I think we'll see what happens with the Zeke news, and that may just make his stock rise a little bit. But I'm pretty wishy-washy, so I think we'll have to wait and see on that.
Yeah. I want to get Allen Robinson, but Brandon Cooks is a guy who if he falls to me, like I've seen him in some drafts, he goes in the third round, and I'm perfectly cool with taking him in the third round. But when he's going, in the beginning, middle of the second, just no chance. Do either of you see Cooks as a guy you want to take there? I don't know why he's necessarily going, 25th, 26th, 27th overall.
No, like I'll take Dez ahead of him. I think guys like Allen and Sammy are going after him, and I think I want both of those over Cooks. I know that Rummy probably might want some Cooks with that New England action.
I don't think even Rummy does. Man.
Well, then, hey, I think that sums it up right there. So I don't know. Cooks is a weird situation to kind of put your finger on. I don't know. Do you have any insight to that, Tags, or?
Sammy Watkins is someone I would definitely take over him. I like Sammy Watkins. But as for Brandon Cooks, again, it comes down to best ball. I like Brandon Cooks in best ball, right? Because you're going to get those weeks where he's got 120 yards, 2 touchdowns. You're going to ride the ups and downs with him, but you don't trade away a first-round draft pick for a guy that you're not going to use. I was willing to write off Julian Edelman to say that Edelman was going to take a backseat in the offense, that they were going to, start to move on, go young with Malcolm Mitchell, even Chris Hogan a little bit, the running backs. It's hard to project everything. And actually earlier today, I was working on all my projections, and Brandon Cooks came in as my number 17 wide receiver. Are you going to get him there in a draft? Most likely not. But that's what I'm saying. In redraft, I probably won't own any Brandon Cooks. But in terms of best ball, I do want to get a few shares just in case, he does see that 122 targets from, Tom Brady, and he has those big weeks, because that's what ultimately we're looking for. Like, I would take him over someone like Demaryius Thomas, because Demaryius Thomas doesn't provide me with the ceiling that I want in best ball. Like, Demaryius Thomas, do you guys know he has not scored 25 PPR points since week 14 of 2014?
Wow.
It doesn't necessarily surprise me, but he just has this such a consistent floor.
His floor, yeah, but in best ball though, it's just I don't know. I guess when I'm drafting that high in the draft, I want a higher ceiling.
There's no TDs for DT. He has 11 out of his past 3 seasons, which equates to the fantasy points per game stat that you just put out there. So
and I agree that generally I want a ceiling out of my players in best ball, but I also want guys who are just going to put startable weeks. And Demaryius is one of those guys that has tons of startable weeks. He is going to be more, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 weeks out of the season, he's going to start on your MFL10 roster. And that's why I'm okay with him. I'm not running into the second round for him, but I'm perfectly fine when Demaryius falls into the late third. And I sort of feel the same way about Brandon Cooks. They're both guys that I'm okay taking the end of the third when they drop, and I feel like they're a value, but I'm not stoked about getting them.
I think it's also too important with Cooks that Allen was added, and there wasn't a lot of target share to go around to begin with. I think I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. So, all right, let's talk Allen Robinson, who Scott Barrett has essentially put to death this offseason.
Did he really?
Oh yeah. If you read an article by Scott Barrett, at some point in the article, he's going to tell you that Allen Robinson sucks.
Perfect.
Yeah, he will slander Robinson over and over. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm probably not buying Robinson because I don't think we're getting much of a discount off of his down last season. Mm-hmm. But he sort of falls into that Cooks Demaryius range for me, where I'm okay taking him when he drops. I think I don't think he's as bad as Scott thinks he is. And I think he's a guy who has that massive best ball ceiling that Mike was talking about. I think, Scott saying he's cornerback sensitive, he obliterates bad cornerbacks. So that's, that ceiling does exist, and I'm okay getting that ceiling when he falls, but I'm not reaching for Allen Robinson as some giant regression candidate. Do you guys have strong feelings on Robinson?
I can tell you that Scott's wrong in terms of Robinson's a bad receiver. He's not a bad receiver. He has a very, very bad quarterback. So I went through and it's a pending profile, so it's not even out yet. But so the stats I came up with on Allen Robinson, if you look at his targets under 20 yards in the air over 2015 and 2016, he was the same exact wide receiver, the same. Like his catch rate was exactly 58%. He caught a few more touchdowns. His yards per target was nearly identical. The difference was in the deep ball from 2015 to 2016. So follow me here. In 2015, he had 46 targets that traveled over 20 yards in the air, 46. He turned them into 672 yards and 3 touchdowns. In 2016, he saw 31 targets, so 15 less, but he only 4 receptions for 108 yards and no touchdowns. That's just a 12.9% catch rate and 3.4 yards per target. The league average is 12.1 yards per target. So, when it comes down to Allen Robinson and the skill level, you have to look outside the numbers sometimes and say, is Allen Robinson a good NFL wide receiver? When you watch him, he is a good NFL wide receiver who happens to play with a very bad quarterback. So I compared this to basketball to baseball. Like if you guys follow those sports, it's like a pinch hitter in baseball, right? Like there's guys that get at bats every single day. They get up there, they take their swings, they get in these rhythms, right? In football, or same thing in basketball. If you're coming off the bench or if you're a starter, there's certain people that need that consistency. Allen Robinson gets zero consistency on the balls that he's thrown. If you've ever watched Blake Bortles throw a football, you know what I'm talking about. And it's impossible for a wide receiver to get in any sort of rhythm. Is some of it on Robinson? Sure. But I think it's mental errors in terms of not getting many catchable balls thrown your way. So, looking at the year over year, I don't think Allen Robinson went from a good player to a bad player. I just think that his quarterback happened to hit on a few deep balls the year before. And for that reason, I am not drafting Allen Robinson as a top-end wide receiver too, because there's going to be way too many inconsistencies in his quarterback play to justify that. What I am doing is buying Allen Robinson in Dynasty after, if he has a few shaky games, buy him in Dynasty because Blake Bortles will not be his quarterback next year.
You want to hear something funny? I traded Scott 2 firsts and 2 seconds for Allen Robinson in our Dynasty league.
Well, you paid top dollar for him. I would have waited to buy cheaper than that, though.
This was when Scott first started saying, I don't want Allen Robinson anymore, like way, way back. And I was like, I want him. I'll give you 2 firsts. And, we're fighting over it. And his value has decreased since then. But I've been an Allen Robinson fan since 2014. He was actually in 2014, before his injury, was one of my most owned DFS wide receivers in 50-50s and head-to-heads, because he just would put up, 3x value, and then that would be it. But I also think it's interesting that Bortles last year had a shoulder injury that doesn't get much talk. So, can he be worse than last year? Maybe it's Bortles, but I don't think he can be worse than last year. So it should be a bounce back year, but you're not getting a discount. So I'm out. In best ball, that is. Yeah. How'd you buy him?
I bought him in Scott Fishbowl 7, but that's just because wide receivers are insanely cheap. So, but in best ball, no, I prefer Marquise Lee far later, which usually keeps me off of A-Rob, just because I'm targeting. I don't know, his ADP is somewhere like just after the 3rd round, so I'm usually like, I'll get super lucky and watch Travis Kelce slip right there, and I'll take Kelce. But yeah, I don't have a lot of shares. Like I should go look at my spreadsheet and see my exact percentage, but it's not very much off the top of my head.
I just wanted to pretend Marquise Lee didn't exist. The more people talk about him, eventually he's gonna move past the 15th round or where, I guess that's where I'm taking him, but apparently his ADP I think is a little lower than that. But
he's cheap.
Well, and think about this real quick, John. So you mentioned Scott's article in terms of versus cornerbacks and how he smashes against bad cornerbacks. don't just put this on the wide receiver. Like, think about this for a second. Like, logically, if Allen Robinson is out there against a bad cornerback and he gets open against that bad cornerback, what does that make it? Whose life does that make it easier on? The quarterbacks, Blake Bortles.
Like, I want to say it makes it easier on Bortles, but I'm not sure if that's true.
Because nothing comes easy to him.
I guess that's probably the case as well. So,
dude, I was so bummed I didn't get him in Scott Fishbowl because like they don't take away points for interceptions and there's no defenses, so like he can throw a pick six and then he's right back on the field. But
man, no, their defense is too good this year. That's another thing that's going to hurt Robinson this year is that their defense is legitimately a top 10 defense, and I think that they can be top 5 with the addition of Calais Campbell. They were already showing signs of improvement over the second half of last year, adding AJ Boye to the secondary too. Like that defense is legit, and that's why Leonard Fournette, I'm a fan of him, even though he's a rookie.
Boye and Ramsey is going to be so sick.
It's ridiculous.
Because they're both so physical. It's like, it's going to be really fun. But I mean, yeah, I think they're probably going to throw the ball less. I think I agree with Hodge on Lee. I think Lee is probably my favorite value outside of Pierre Garçon in MFL10s and, other redraft or other best ball leagues. I'm okay. I think Bortles has become a little bit of a value because people just really, really hate him, but it's tough to buy. It's tough to buy Robinson. I think we all agree on Watkins. I probably like Keenan Allen a little more than Mike. I don't like Keenan Allen quite as much as Hodge. Hodge, man, talk me into Keenan Allen. I know you've been waiting to give us Keenan Allen propaganda.
Honestly, it has everything to do with where he's currently going. If you look at last year's ADP, it was like all Alshon Jeffrey, Keenan Allen at the 1-2 turn, right? And not a lot. I mean, I know that they went out and they got a wide receiver and they drafted a wide receiver early, and I know that
he's dead.
He's look.
I'm not saying Keenan's dead. I'm saying Mike Williams is dead, man. Mike Williams is dead. We'll talk about that, but go ahead.
I think that it's important to understand that Allen had a pretty good yards per target. It was somewhere around 7.5 yards per target. His points per game when he was actually playing and seeing snaps was close to 15.5 points per game. And he was close to just under half a TD per game when he was doing that as well. And I don't know what is Landry's current ADP. He's actually a guy I don't have a lot. Okay, so Jarvis Landry's current ADP is 3.11, so it's just at the end of the fourth. Keenan Allen's current ADP is literally one pick behind him. Landry ranks well below every single one of those statistically.
Oh, if you're taking Jarvis Landry over Keenan Allen, like I would be mad at you.
Some people, dude, look at your Twitter feed. Like I'm just saying, some people are doing that. Keenan Allen has everything to do with an opportunity of him finishing. I gave a hot take on the last one within the top 5 wide receiver, but he actually has an opportunity of finishing with inside the top 10, and you're not paying close to that price right now.
Oh yeah, I think Keenan Allen has, he has that huge ceiling. If he stays healthy for, it doesn't even have to be 14 games, 12, 13 games. You're probably getting massive production out of him in that offense.
Are you predicting an injury? You're giving me shit.
No.
Schedule and you're predicting injury?
I do not think he's a guy. I'm not predicting like a season-ending injury here. I'm saying he's a guy that gets nicked up.
Okay,
that's a thing. So he misses a game or two. That doesn't bother me. Like I don't care if you guaranteed me Keenan Allen was going to play 14 games, then I'm taking him earlier than his ADP. So, you're getting a bit of an injury discount. I like Keenan Allen. I'm fine. I'm not taking him early. I'm fine taking him. He's going like right at the end of the 3rd round. Anytime he falls into the 4th round, he's like an auto pick for me. If I'm in the 4th round and Keenan Allen is available, he's on my roster. Everyone's talking about Mike Williams sort of coming in and like taking over snaps and whatnot. Mike Williams has a herniated disc. I don't predict him to have any type of early season production. That's not, some kind of simple injury. It's either a herniated disc or bulging disc, something like that. I mean, back injuries are nothing to play around with. So I don't think Mike Williams is a concern. So if Keenan Allen's healthy, then, his ceiling is being Phillip Rivers' go-to guy and, getting 130, 140 targets. And I'm okay with that. Mike, you are not on Keenan Allen.
No. You guys, I don't think you guys want to hear my Keenan Allen takes.
I do. I want to hear it. I'm excited for it.
So obviously you guys know about the competition for targets, and it's not even Mike Williams. Tyrell Williams, people talk about Keenan and all the hype about him being a great receiver and this and that. And I'm not saying he's a bad receiver. I'm just saying that he has yet to finish better than the number 17 wide receiver. And yes, it has to do with injuries. Sure. There was the 1 year that everybody reminds me of that he was on pace to be a top 5 receiver and this and that. I have a coincidence in terms of that year and why that happened. So Phillip Rivers, when Keenan Allen got hurt in 2015, at the halfway point, Phillip Rivers was on pace for 702 pass attempts, if I'm not mistaken. I think that was the exact number. I knew it was 700 attempts. I know that. All right. Phillip Rivers in his career that season, over the second half, he went down to 661 attempts for the season. But outside of that 1 year, Phillip Rivers has never thrown more than 582 times. So when you look at Keenan Allen and the volume of targets that he was getting that year, in terms of a target share, it was a realistic number. Like, it sounds crazy, but it was very, very realistic for him to see 190 targets when Phillip Rivers is throwing the ball 700 times. Now, here we are. It's no coincidence that year that Phillip Rivers threw all that time, that was with Ken Wisenhunt off in Tennessee. Ken Wisenhunt came back. You've seen Phillip Rivers come back down. I think it was 570 something attempts last year. And, you could say, well, Keenan Allen wasn't healthy. Well, that's been the case for seemingly every season. But what I did is I went through and I broke it down. While most receivers, yes, when they get more targets, they perform. But with Keenan Allen, it's a very, very large number that he requires. In games where he has seen 10 targets or less, 10 targets is still a very high number. But when he sees 10 targets or less, Keenan Allen has averaged 48.9 yards per game. And it all amounts to everything, just cutting it off. PPR points, 10.49 PPR points per game. With over 10 targets, so 11 or more, that's when he averages 117 yards per game. Almost 3/4 of a touchdown, 25.9 PPR points. Like, all is great in the world with Keenan Allen. The problem is when you look at this Chargers team right now, whether it be Mike Williams, Tyrell Williams, Dontrell Inman, who is I think a top 20 yardage wide receiver over the last 8 weeks. Travis Benjamin is someone they spent money on last year in free agency that he didn't really go away. Hunter Henry, people are expecting him to have a bigger role. Antonio Gates came back for like his 90th season. Melvin Gordon is coming back. He missed the final 3 games of the season. Brandon Oliver, pass-catching running back who caught, I think, 50 passes, playing a part-time role the 2 years prior. He's back. So it's like, how many games can we realistically project Keenan Allen to see more than 10 targets? That's my problem with it. And even in the case that he does, his schedule, the entire AFC West schedule is hard this year, which is another knock on Amari Cooper, because they will play the Broncos twice, they will play the Chiefs twice, the Giants, the Patriots, the Jaguars, we just talked about the cornerbacks there, and the Redskins, which means he's going to see Josh Norman. So, like, you look at the schedule, it's really tough. Like I said, if you project Phillip Rivers to make a jump in pass attempts, great. We haven't seen it outside of one single year without Ken Wisenhunt. If you project that Mike Williams, his back injury, that's going to affect him, he doesn't make an impact. If you project that Hunter Henry doesn't take a step forward and see more targets, that Antonio Gates fades into nothing, that Tyrell Williams all of a sudden is a nobody in fantasy, yeah, sure, I could buy all that. I could buy Allen being a top 12 fantasy wide receiver, something he's never done before. But for me, realistically, for Keenan Allen this year, for me to draft him, he has to fall outside the top 20 wide receivers. I would take him over Jarvis Landry. I'm with you guys, but I would take guys like Brandon Cooks over him. I would take Devontae Adams because I just prefer Aaron Rodgers throwing him the ball. Sammy Watkins, like, these are guys that I would take over Keenan Allen. Is he a safe floor guy? Sure. But I know that if I'm waiting to grab him as the wide receiver 20 to 22 range, I'm probably not going to get him all that often.
No, you're definitely not. What if I told you that Keenan Allen was on pace to have 14 targets per game last year, though, before he died?
Did he play like one half?
He did. He did.
Get out of here.
And but no. I mean, I still think that I firmly believe that Mike Williams will not have any impact this season. People are sort of blowing off the herniated disc, and
The
I'm
thing
like,
is that with that injury, like he's also missing reps. He's missing practice time. So like that
Dude.
just comes down to it as well. It's
people are like, oh, it's just a herniated disc. I'm like, what? That's like a serious injury.
You know what's funny about this, John? I can speak like personally. I have a back fusion. I had major back surgery done. I've dealt with bulging discs. I dealt with a ruptured disc, herniated, all that stuff. So Ryan said it though. The biggest part of this entire thing isn't necessarily his back thing, because that's going to come and go. Like, I know the injury. I've literally had it, and I ended up having major back surgery because something worse happened. Yeah. But it's the missing of the practice reps. If he's not learning the offense, he's not going to get in front of Tyrell Williams, Dontrell Inman, Travis Benjamin. They know the offense, obviously. It's going to take time for Mike Williams to get there. Honestly, I have no idea why Mike Williams, this guy that they literally just drafted with the number 7 overall pick in the NFL draft, has not gotten a microdiscectomy. It's a very minor back surgery where if you have a herniated disc, they can go in there and put an artificial disc in there. You're back to work, usually in 2-3 weeks after some rehab. Obviously, he has a harder job than most people, but it's something that people come back from. Like, it's not a major back surgery. It's a very minor one that he would need. But for some reason, they're putting it off, and he's missing all this practice time. So I'm with you that Mike Williams doesn't make a huge impact, but I do think that he makes his way onto the field and sees maybe 50 targets or something like that.
There's also Mike Williams doesn't have anything done to it. A herniated disc, it's not just going to like perfectly heal on its own. And then he takes one shot to the back, and then he's fucked for the rest of the season. I don't know why he hasn't had anything done either, especially if they've known about this. I feel like you don't just like wake up one day and go get an MRI and find out you had a herniated disc. I deal with this every day. I spend my days, reading MRI reports and whatnot. And it's not like somebody just doesn't know they have a herniated disc. And I love there's, well, it's a mild herniated disc. Oh, okay. It's still a herniated disc. So, yeah, I don't think he's a concern. I get the concern, with lots of mouths to feed, but I still think at the end of the day, if Keenan Allen plays a full season, he's definitely, of all the guys that exist there, he's 100% Rivers' favorite target. So I think we do know that at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with you there, and that's why I'm willing to take him in that 20 to 22 range. It's just so many mouths, such a bad schedule. I told people the other day they called me a liar, and I was like, no, I would not draft Phillip Rivers, because if you draft Phillip Rivers, you're going to need to draft. And I'm not talking about MFL10s, by the way. I'm talking about like in a redraft league, because if you draft Phillip Rivers, you're going to need to draft another quarterback to play in weeks 1, 2, 4. And then 6, 8, and 9. So it's just stupid. Yeah. I wouldn't draft Phillip Rivers. Seriously.
Yeah, he's going to be really tough for redraft leagues. I'm fine with Rivers in best ball leagues though, because
he'll have the big weeks for sure.
He's going to have huge games. Yeah. But yeah, I'm pretty much okay with like the next group of receivers. I think the wide receiver 2 ADP is actually pretty good. The Tate, the Crabtree, the Devontae, the Alshon, Jarvis Landry. I won't touch at all. I think they want to run the ball. I think we saw him the second half of the season in the run-first offense. Unless you believe that Jay Ajayi is like legitimately a fraud, I don't think there's any reason in taking Jarvis Landry at ADP. Do either of you guys want him? If not, we'll just move on to the next group of receivers.
No, give me Devontae, Alshon, Terrell Pryor, Tyreek Hill are all going later than Jarvis. So that's an easy fade.
Yeah, so I'm okay. I think that 16 to 30 so wide receiver group is pretty good. But there's 2 guys that I have concerns on. It's Jamison Crowder and Julian Edelman. Let's talk Crowder real quick. Crowder is going, 54, 52, 53, 54, 55 ADP overall pick. And I think that's pretty rich for a guy that's, essentially a slot wide receiver. He's not the wide receiver 1 there. He's competing with, Terrell Pryor and Jordan Reed. Mike, are you buying Crowder at ADP?
I like Crowder, the player. I just don't like the situation right now. Cousins spreads the ball around an awful lot, and that's why I don't own any Pryor either. I think Pryor's being drafted at his ceiling right now because Cousins over the course of his career has never targeted a wide receiver more than 6.9 targets per game. And to get inside the top 15 wide receivers, you're going to need to see more than that, and you're going to need to be a wide receiver that has played more than 1 year at the position. So, Pryor, sure. I mean, he's fine. But in terms of Crowder, I tried playing around with the projections today and trying to squeeze everything I could out of him so that I can see people why they were drafting him there. And even though I like the player Crowder, I can't squeeze any more than 110 targets. And when you look at his per target production out of the slot or whatever they're going to do with him, I think his highest touchdown upside is like 7 touchdowns, which is, I think, what he scored last year. So, no, I don't get it. I would much rather own John Brown. I would much rather own Stephon Diggs.
Hodge, you want Crowder?
I'll actually definitely. Well, hold on. We'll have to drink. He just said John Brown.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's what Holker said, right?
I'll definitely take the Diggs over Crowder. I actually am not entirely sure that one's close, even though their ADP suggests it.
Not close at all.
To kind of just like be devil's advocate here. I think some people are pretty hyped on Crowder's like catch rate, right? Like I think they see those numbers and they're just like, oh, dude pushed a 70% catch rate. If he's going to get 120 targets again, why doesn't he go here, right? So I think that's kind of where you're at with that. His yards per target was pretty high, a lot higher than Keenan Allen's. I'll give him that. But it is true with what you said about Cousins and how he spreads the ball around with Reed and Pryor now. So I think Diggs is definitely ahead. I think Snead is ahead, even though Snead's ADP is after Crowder's. I definitely think Crabtree is a far better pick than Crowder. And ADP actually suggests that too. There's almost like a 5 or 6 picks in between the two, but I think Crabtree is probably a better pick than Crowder. Dude,
it's like everyone in the same range I would rather have than Jamison Crowder. And the thing is like, people talk about the high catch rate, he's a slot receiver. Like if the dude didn't have a high catch rate, I mean, he's probably bad. And he doesn't even have that high of a catch rate for
slot receivers.
Right, for the role he's playing, especially playing slot receiver on an offense that has Deshaun Jackson. I mean, you are running in the middle of the field with safeties playing back because of – so you have a free safety who's watching Deshaun Jackson oftentimes, and then you have a strong safety who has to pay attention to Jordan Reed. Then he had Pierre Garçon. It's not like Crowder was just like creating all of this space for himself. I think it'll be different this year. Without Deshaun Jackson to clear things out. I mean, you look at that team, that offense. The passing core is different. So I can't do it on Crowder. I don't think there's much of a ceiling. So if he hits sort of like his best case outcome, it's like he gets 120 targets and 1,000 yards. Best case, it's not like we're going to miss out on like a 1,600 yard receiver that could be Sanders, could be Snead, could be Fitzgerald, could be Diggs. No thanks.
Agreed. I don't own any Jamison Crowder. Honestly, receivers in this range, I don't own any Larry Fitzgerald, any Jamison Crowder. I may have a share or two of Willie Snead. He just got too rich for my blood. I liked him in the beginning of MFL10 season, but he's crept up because all the sharps are on him and it's just too stupid. But Julian Edelman, I don't own any of him. Emmanuel Sanders, very light. But that whole area of wide receivers, I don't like very much. I'd rather skip ahead to, like I said, I love John Brown. And you guys can drink again, but John Brown, I mentioned on every podcast, I've made it a point. John Brown is fantasy football's best kept secret right now. I have no idea why he's being drafted after Corey Davis. He's being drafted after Cameron Meredith. It's just stupid.
But is he more of a best kept secret than Pierre Son?
Pierre Garçon is actually being drafted right around where he should be. Like when he was actually traded to, or not traded, when he signed with San Francisco, I did an article right away on it. Like I did an instant react for Fantasy Pros, and I wrote in there basically with the target share that he was going to be getting, barring the fact that, unless they secured a big name wide receiver in free agency like Alshon Jeffrey, but I said that he would be a top 36 wide receiver, like locked. And at that point, his ADP was, I kid you not, it was wide receiver 56. And it has slowly crept up. It has slowly crept up. And now I'm seeing it at wide receiver 33, which means I'm kind of out, because Pierre Garçon is like, he was the guy that you can get in the late rounds, and he's going to like almost probably find his way into your starting lineup in best ball every single week. But when you're drafting him in that range of like someone like by Dante Moncrief, no, like, what are you doing? Like we're looking for ceiling there. Pierre Garçon's a great guy to target in like a redraft league for a safe play, like a wide receiver 3 that you went really cheap on, but he crept all the way up to the point where he just doesn't have that weekly ceiling. And like I mentioned it earlier, is that him and Demaryius Thomas, I actually envision them at the end of the season to have somewhat similar stat lines. Demaryius Thomas is going to be better, but I'd much rather take Pierre Garçon this late. But again, when I get this late, I'm taking John Brown. So,
dude, the sixth, I feel like though, in the 6th round, how can you not? So if you're a guy who's going running back, not necessarily heavy, but you're taking 2 or 3 running backs in the first 5 rounds, which I think is probably the preferred way of handling an MFL10, right, or should be. There's a little bit of a 0 RB movement that I disagreed with on our last podcast, but I think Pierre Garçon is like one of the safer bets for startable production in that range. Do you like Dante Moncrief over Pierre Garçon?
I do definitely like him better, because I mean, I'm just not a like, and this is one where this is based on gut. Like, so when you get down this range, I'm looking for upside. Like Pierre Garçon was a fine pick when he was outside the top 40 wide receivers, considering he's in the high 30s now, like 33 is where his ADP is. I'm out because I want a ceiling that comes with it. Like, he's going to hit that floor for sure. Like, if you want a safe player, sure, but that's just not how I build my teams. And Dante Moncrief, I don't think we've seen the best of Dante Moncrief. There are so many like parallels with his career that have gone along with Devontae Adams. And, even going to the fact that they both have elite quarterbacks, they both have terrible defenses. They both have another number 1 on their team, whereas Jordy Nelson and T.Y. Hilton. There's so many parallels here where it's just, I'm waiting for Dante Moncrief to have this breakout. And I think it can happen because, Matt Harmon has charted him, and, everything looks good on tape with him. Like, right. And this is one that there's no statistical evidence to back up. We know that Dante Moncrief is fantastic in the red zone. We know that, he's a wide receiver being drafted outside the top 30 that has a chance at 10 touchdowns. It's rare that you could find that in this range. So that's what I'm chasing there. I'm just chasing the upside with Moncrief is all that really comes down to. Garçon is a safer pick 100%. But I just don't. I guess I should just say, once I get down this far in the draft, I don't draft that way. I just look for, I want ceilings, and I want a guy that could finish as a top 20 wide receiver, and I don't think that's in Pierre Garçon's range of outcomes.
So I'll put my 2 cents on it, and then people can kind of just do what they want to. I think it's important to note that Garçon he's going to get the Shanahan effect, right? And we'll just leave it at that. Like, that's pretty put out there.
And the Hoyer effect.
Oh, don't get me started on Hoyer. That's my boy. Easy pick in the late round. But I also think it's important to note that Moncrief's catch rate was just above 50%, and there's no way in hell it's going to be that low again this year. He also scored a handful of TDs. He pushed 7 TDs. I think it was 7 TDs in the 9 games. If he plays 14, 15, 16 games, like it's got to happen for Moncrief. So I actually think that they're a lot closer than some of those Moncrief doubters. And he's young. Like you said, Tags, that breakout season is coming.
Yeah.
And there's a very good chance that it comes sooner than later.
I just feel like Moncrief, when he finally became like the starter, was a floor player more than he was.
He was like Decker.
A ceiling player. Yeah.
No, he is Decker.
The problem is, if you want Moncrief to be that ceiling player, but I don't think he's going to be as long as T.Y. Hilton is there, because, he's not going to beat T.Y. Hilton as the downfield threat for Andrew Luck. That's my concern.
Well, for sure. But at the same time, you look at the times where Dante Moncrief's been healthy and Andrew Luck's been healthy, it's been very minimal. Like Dante Moncrief was hurt, then Andrew Luck was hurt. And when they were on the field together, I want to say 8 of their last 10 games, I think, Dante Moncrief's caught a touchdown in. So they have a connection. The stat I threw out there was like a month ago. Dante Moncrief saw 6 targets inside the 5-yard line, and he caught all 6 of them for touchdowns. Like he's a monster in the red zone. It could be like a Des Bryant type effect because he's done it for back-to-back seasons. But I think this is the year where Luck gets back on track, that the defense that I know they've tried to rebuild it and all that with the aging linebackers and free agents and this and that, but it's still a bad defense. Frank Gore, as much as people want to say that Frank Gore is never going to die, I'm done with Frank Gore. Like I don't have any Frank Gore, and I won't own any Frank Gore. I just won't. But this offense needs something more. This offense needs it less game managing, and it means more no huddle. And Dante Moncrief's a young wide receiver. T.Y. Hilton's not going anywhere. I think that there's room for both T.Y. Hilton and Dante Moncrief to finish as top 20 fantasy wide receivers if Andrew Luck, in fact, throws for 5,000 yards and 40 touchdowns.
And I do think Luck should bounce back after, the shoulder surgery. Should be more more healthy. I think that's a help. I think that's something that needed to happen
for sure.
But I can't do Moncrief over Garcon. Like I look at Shanahan, Garcon, 2013, 180 targets. And I have a hard time seeing Garcon having less than like 120, 130 targets. And I think he has a ceiling of, 180, 190 targets in that offense. So
Garcon, though, here's the thing. Like, I'm being completely transparent here. Pierre Garcon in my projections is number 28 receiver. Moncrief's 30. So that's the thing is like I don't always go by projections. Garcon 125 targets easy. Like that's a realistic outcome for him. But my issue with Garcon, the reason that he doesn't have the ceiling that you'd want out of somebody like that, like Dante Moncrief, is because they're not going to throw a bunch of touchdowns. Like San Francisco is not a good football team. And I think that a ceiling for Pierre Garcon, I think the max touchdowns you could project for him is 5. And when you have 5 touchdowns, as I mentioned with Amari Cooper, he was the only wide receiver to finish in the top 15 with less than 6 touchdowns. So it's a really tough area to get into. And I can't see, I actually am projecting Pierre Garcon for 4 touchdowns, even though I think Brian Hoyer, as Ryan mentioned, Brian Hoyer is he's an underrated quarterback in actual real life. Like Brian Hoyer is not a bad quarterback at all. They're just not going to have very many scoring opportunities.
I agree with you on touchdowns, but I think that like if you had good odds on betting Pierre Garcon to lead the NFL in targets, that would be a bet that I would make.
That's crazy.
So
yeah.
I'm paying for targets. I'm okay with paying that.
No, it's fair. They're both good picks. I think we could agree there.
Yeah. Fair enough. Let's sort of I think there's not too many polarizing guys. I think, Kelvin Benjamin's going just about where he should be. Not really buying Devontae Parker, but I wouldn't be upset if people are buying him where he's going. Deshaun Jackson. Then we get down to Jeremy Maclin, who has spiked since going to Baltimore. I'm okay with Maclin where he's going. I take him, to some degree at his word that he had an injury that he was playing through last year. There are some quotes flying around. I believe they might have come from Matthew Berry, someone at ESPN, that there was a guy on a team in that division that sort of just gave up, was washed. People were sort of thinking it might be Maclin, and then they cut him. Are you into Maclin, Tags? Or are you off of him? You think he's like washed?
100%. I think he's a top 30 wide receiver. I think he's in that same range as Pierre Garcon, and I would argue that Jeremy Maclin has more upside than he does because you look at all the targets that have left Baltimore, like going through the list, it's somewhat ridiculous. And they also, on top of all that, they don't have a red zone weapon. Like they lost Steve Smith, they lost Kamar Aiken, Dennis Pitta with the hip thing, Kyle Juszczyk, like he's gone. Like there are so many options from this team, and Danny Woodhead, I'm sorry, is not going to see 150 targets.
Nope.
It's not going to happen. Ben Watson, like 90-year-old Ben Watson is not going to see more than 50 targets. Like who is going to be the red zone threat? We've seen Jeremy Maclin do it in years past. I think just because Jeremy Maclin played with Alex Smith the last couple of years, people want to forget and say that, oh, he's just a boring wide receiver. Jeremy Maclin, when he played with the Eagles, and it was with Nick Foles, I want to say, or actually that might have been the Mike Vick year, where he was like a legitimate downfield threat. Like he was breaking plays. Like I think that there was a few games where he had 150 plus yards. Jeremy Maclin was a playmaker. Anytime he's been on the field, he's been a playmaker outside of the time with, Alex Smith, where he was just a game manager wide receiver. I think that's the best way to describe it. They have said that he's going to take over the Steve Smith role. And if that's indeed the case, I'm buying Maclin all over the place. Like I think wide receiver 38, where he's going in ADP right now, I think that's actually cheap. I would draft him as a top 32 guy, I think.
It's ridiculous. He's so easy to pick too.
Yeah.
So it's one of those, you take 3 running backs and then you can like take Pierre Garçon, late 6, early 7, and then follow it with like a Deshaun Jackson or a Kelvin Benjamin and then Jeremy Maclin. And like you can do that on teams, and you can get these guys that are going in this 30 to 40 range that shouldn't really be going there. Maclin I think is in the top 40 receivers, one of the most undervalued of them. Hodge, do you like Maclin?
Yeah, I will literally echo what Tag said. That so many targets they have so many targets available. If Maclin can run, I don't know, 30, 35% of his routes in Baltimore from the slot, which he's very familiar with doing when he was in Kansas City, there's no reason that he can't finish with inside the top 24 wide receiver. It's absurd to me. But I will say that over the past 2 weeks and 4 weeks, his ADP is risen like 25 picks. So like it's not like this is some hidden secret, but he's still going too late. Like I still think that he's in a great value where he's currently at, let alone where you could have got him 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, here's a fun fact for you guys on Maclin. I found it. So he saw, going back through his career, he saw 115 targets in 2010, 122 targets in 2012, and 124 targets in 2015. Those are realistic numbers for him to hit, right, in Baltimore. I mean, Joe Flacco may not be an elite quarterback, but I don't think Jeremy Maclin has ever played with an elite quarterback. In those seasons, if you combine them, combining those seasons, he averaged 75 receptions, 970 yards, and 8.3 touchdowns. Those numbers would have amounted to a top 15 wide receiver in 2016.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think Baltimore has sort of perfected the how to make an old receiver successful. And we see it in Arizona right now. If you want to see how that doesn't work, go watch Calvin Johnson's final year in Detroit. How to ruin your old wide receiver. You just run him on 9 routes until his fucking knees explode. So when you give these guys the opportunity to succeed as an older receiver, they do it. You watch what Larry Fitzgerald is doing in Arizona. You watch what Anquan Bolden did in Baltimore. Then you watch what they did with Derek Mason. You watch what they did with Steve Smith. And I don't think they're going to do anything different this year. Macklin's probably going to push 40, 50, 60% in the slot. And there's no reason to think any different. And while Flacco is like not, anything special, he has supported wide receivers through his career, and I think he'll do it again. So even if Maclin only gets 120 targets, that 100% pays off his ADP, even if he's not anything special. If you get 120 targets, 1,000 yards, and 4-5 touchdowns, he has met or exceeded that ADP. And if he is better than he was last year, the injury was a real thing, you could get a guy that has 1,500 yards or something that you're paying nothing for. So, I'm starting to want to be all in, but I hate to do that when I'm like a Ravens fan. It just makes me feel like a homer. All right. So, real quick, 2 guys who I want to ask you about, and then we'll all just sort of give a late round guy that we like. I posed this question the other day to somebody. Quincy Enunwa or Kenny Britt, hopefully anyone who knows me knows 100% where I lie on this one. But Mike, if you had to pick one, who is it and why?
I'm not on your side. I can tell you that. I know you're a Kenny Britt guy.
No.
I am not. I'm Quincy Enunwa. We talked about it, and basically, if you're a wide receiver and you're guaranteed 120 targets, you're pretty much a lock for a top 36 wide receiver. And Quincy Enunwa is there. I can't. I've toyed with it so many times to try and figure out a way not to draft Quincy Enunwa on MFL10s at the wide receiver 36, and there is legitimately no reason not to. He's a guy that finished with, I want to say it was like, he finished with more fantasy points than Brandon Marshall last year, getting targets from the same quarterback on like 23 less targets. I think he scored like 30 more fantasy points. It was something ridiculous. But Quincy Enunwa, I'm more than okay with him being drafted around that wide receiver 40 range. I think that's where he belongs. I think you can get a little more out of him. Kenny Britt is a guy that I know why people want to like him, but at the same time, this guy he's a veteran of the league. He's been around for a long time. And last year was his first year with more than 800 yards in a season. Like, let's not get excited about a guy that is his advanced age, just took a 1-year contract, right? It was a 1-year contract, right? With the Browns.
I think it's more than 1 year, but let me look.
I might be wrong on that, but I know Terrell Pryor's was 1 year. Maybe that's just where I'm getting it twisted. But Kenny Britt,
yeah, Britt's is 4.
I think that Corey Coleman is the number one option there. I don't think they're going to be in a position to score many touchdowns, so I can't project him for 120 targets like I can someone like Quincy Enunwa. They're both on obviously bad teams, so I will take the one that's guaranteed to get more targets, that doesn't have a potentially franchise wide receiver on the other side of the field, in which Corey Coleman is supposed to be that guy.
So my thing with Corey Coleman is that outside of the Baltimore game, he legitimately sucked last year.
He was not good. The hand injury didn't play with it, but at the same time, I can't defend Corey Coleman last year for sure, but I can't defend Kenny Britt either, though.
He smoked the legitimate worst cornerback in the NFL for like a strong game. And if we toss that game, which we should, because you should toss any game against Sharice Wright in any type of sample, he was bad. And Kenny Britt elevated, Rams quarterbacks above, averages. And he was also, we were talking about a guy that in 2011 exploded onto the field and looked like, if you want to go back and watch 2011, end of 2010, Kenny Britt looked like the best wide receiver in the NFL. And that's not even like, crazy to say. He literally looked like one of those guys. And then he turned into a total moron. He was doing the dumbest shit possible, in Nashville. And it was, to me, absolutely a mental thing. And then he goes to St. Louis and plays with total bums at quarterback. And for the first time, he was used as a wide receiver 1. I don't think it's hyperbole to say that he's, at this stage in his career, a better and more polished receiver than Corey Coleman. So I don't have any problem projecting him for more targets than Coleman. And if you give, Britt 120 targets, I think he's going to give you 1,000 yards. I don't see it from Coleman yet. Hopefully he does ascend to his draft position, but I haven't seen it yet. And my concern with Quincy Enunwa is that he is, there's not going to be any sort of extended leash for him. They have no reason to give him, any long leash because he has no draft value. He was a sixth round pick. So for him to get into some kind of a doghouse wouldn't shock me. And he's only had one successful year, and it was playing the slot in a Chiangeli offense, which is, one of the most prolific spots for a wide receiver to be, is playing, slot wide receiver for Chiangeli. We saw what Eric Decker did in the slot with Chiangeli. We've seen what receivers have done in the past in the slot for Chiangeli in Buffalo, and I have no idea what to expect from him this year. So I think he's a little more of a question mark to me than Britt.
I could understand why you're not going to love Quincy Enunwa. I'm not saying that the player, I'm going all out to say that the player like Jeremy Maclin, I think he's a player. I think that's why I'm more than comfortable drafting him. We're talking in a range where, when you're at the wide receiver 40 range around this tier, it's tough to find someone that you can guarantee that targets from. And I'm not even saying that. I'm not going to argue the fact that it's possible that Kenny Britt out targets Corey Coleman, because I think that is a realistic possibility. Do I think it'll happen? Maybe. I think they're going to be somewhat close, actually. I just think that the yards per catch will be up for Coleman, even if the catch rate is down a little bit. But Kenny Britt, you talked about it. He's a guy that if we look at anything, his entire career, his outlier of a season was last year. Like, you look at his career and they are pretty much in line. Like, despite seeing 70, 80, 90 targets, he was scoring 3 or 4 touchdowns. Now, granted, he had crap quarterbacks. I'm not going to sit here and to say that he didn't. He had Ryan Fitzpatrick earlier in his career, whatever. Matt Hasselbeck, whatever. But Cody Kessler is not any better. So for me, like I said, it's just 111 targets with the Rams last year. I know that Terrell Pryor saw 140 targets. I just don't see Kenny Britt on that level. I don't think that he's a guy that can break off over and over and over, big plays like Terrell Pryor could. So, I mean, it's an argument that could definitely be had. And it's something that those are the articles I like to write, where it's just like, okay, let me see, because you may go in with one mindset and you'd come out with a different. Like, I'm always open to the debate, but for me, I mean, they're in that same tier. I think that in the end, I think they're in the same tier. It's just one I can say doesn't have a legitimate option on the other side of the field. And I don't think that they're indebted to Quincy and Nunwa for sure. Like, as you mentioned, he's a late pick, but who else do they have to put on the field? Robbie Anderson might get suspended. I love Ardarius Stewart, but he's still a rookie. Chad Hansen, like Marquise Wilson, they just signed him. So there's just nobody else there. And as for with Cleveland, you have David Njoku, you have Corey Coleman, you have Isaiah Crowell, who showed that he can catch some passes last year. You have Duke Johnson. So there's just a lot of players there. So I can't project Kenny Britt confidently for more than maybe 110 targets, maybe.
I just think that Corey Coleman is only getting credit as like a quote unquote threat on the other side because of draft position. In reality, I mean, we have seen nothing to suggest that he's actually a threat.
Last preseason, he looked pretty solid. Like, I know that I saw some of the camp stuff that they were doing, and him and RG3 were hooking up. Like, that's the question. Do they have a quarterback that can tailor to his strengths? And I don't know if they do, because they compared him to like a younger Steve Smith. And I'm not, again, it could be draft position. We could be wrong on the evaluation of Corey Coleman, but a lot of people had him as their number 2 behind Laquan Treadwell, who, as we all know, that didn't really pan out.
Yeah. I don't know. I just have tons of hesitation for a guy who couldn't put up 50 yards unless he was facing Sharice Wright. That really bothers me.
It's too bad they couldn't face Joe Hayden on the other side of the field, right?
I mean, let him run against anyone but Sharice Wright, and I will accept it as a little more. But all right. So before we run too long, I know you got to get out of here. Give me your favorite late round wide receiver, let's say, 50th overall wide receiver or later. If you want to steal Marquise Lee from me, you are welcome to do so. But anyone after the 50th or so that you are really excited about.
Well, yeah, I'll go even deeper. I'll go to number 74, Devin Funchess. A lot of people have written this guy off. Last year, if you wanted to trade for Devin Funchess in the offseason in dynasty leagues, people wanted a pretty penny for him, and I guess for good reason. They were tying him to Cam Newton and the fact that, it takes time for him to work his way onto the field. Ron Rivera didn't want to trust him. This offseason, Ron Rivera has talked about the fact that Devin Funchess, they could have used him better. They really could have. And I don't know if this comes back to the way they were using him, because over his first 2 seasons, he's averaged 15.6 yards per reception, which, that's massive for a guy of his size. It's tough to envision that to keep going, but at the same time, who is going to be that field stretcher for the Carolina Panthers? Ted Ginn is out, and that is arguably what Cam Newton does the best. Is his arm is his biggest asset outside of his legs, and they pulled his legs out from under him. They don't want him to run anymore. They brought in people to do that. Some people are telling me it's Curtis Samuel, and if you want to rely on a rookie playing under Ron Rivera, good luck. It seems like they don't even want Christian McCaffrey to have as big a role as some people do. He's a rookie. They want Jonathan Stewart to carry the rock. I get that, all that. But Devin Funchess is a guy over his career. We talked about it, that double-digit touchdown upside. He's had, I think, 121 career targets to this point. He's scored 9 touchdowns on them. He's been a more efficient wide receiver than Kelvin Benjamin. And Kelvin Benjamin might be stuck in purgatory here, because Kelvin Benjamin's been a guy who's, been that possession, I guess, style receiver for them. Christian McCaffrey is going to help fill that role. He's going to play the slot. Greg Olsen is obviously in a contract year. He's going to be playing his heart out. Kelvin Benjamin looked lazy at times last year. I know Cam Newton threw a couple interceptions. He wasn't happy at Benjamin about because Benjamin did not chase the defender who intercepted the ball. You know, everything is pointing to Devin Funchess starting in 2 wide receiver sets. And again, he fits what Cam Newton does best. I don't love Cam Newton, the quarterback. As a matter of fact, I said in our podcast the other day that in 3 years, I don't know if he's the starting quarterback for the Carolina Panthers. I don't know if that's the case. And, you know, with the whole GM situation, things are changing, but they need to play to Cam Newton's strengths. And if there's one thing he does well, he's got a big arm and you need to get it downfield. Kelvin Benjamin doesn't have the speed to do it. Devin Funchess has shown it throughout his career. So getting him, you know, down by guys like Mohamed Sanu, JJ Nelson, Robbie Anderson, Chris Conley, I'll take Devin Funchess all day.
Yeah, I think Curtis Samuel, I think they've drafted to play some slot. So that should push Funchess out of the slot that was didn't really seem like a natural position for him.
Yeah. And well, that's the thing. Some people have told me Samuel is going to take over the Ted Ginn role. I'm like, if you're going to project Curtis Samuel for 100 targets, be my guest, but that's not going to happen. It's not. Christian McCaffrey is basically, they've been saying that he's going to be the slot receiver. So you're going to see Funchess on the outside opposite of Kelvin Benjamin. And I think that he might be the more physically gifted wide receiver.
I like that one. I like it. I wasn't really in on Funchess, but
he's free. He's free.
It's true. He is a 20th round pick.
Yeah.
Type of guy. Hodge, you got one?
Yeah, so I'll kind of go along with the same round. That tag just went with like super, super late. I think fantasypros.com has him somewhere around the 80th overall. Let me double check. 86. Paul Richardson is currently the 86th wide receiver going off the board. It's somewhere around the beginning of the 19th round. I know Tyler Lockett's there. I know Curse is there, but and obviously Baldwin, but really he's looking for competing snaps with Jermaine and with Tyler Lockett. I honestly think he's far ahead of Jermaine in that offense. He's truly, truly stepped up in Lockett's absence towards the very, very end of last season. And this is something where I think you should 100% take a flyer on him in MFL10s right now. He's literally cheap. So as you're getting your 7th, 8th wide receiver, whatever strategy you're kind of building around with roster construction, he's definitely a guy that you can look if you've already got 2 defenses or don't plan on getting a third, or you take a third in the 20th and, you know, you take Paul Richardson in the 19th or whatever it is. I think he's a guy that you should take a flyer on because he has a legit shot to build a real chemistry with Russell Wilson and really earn some snaps this upcoming season.
Love it. Love it.
No, I'm with you. I'm not gonna use Marquise Lee since we already talked about him. I think he's a great value, but I'm just gonna go ahead and say Rashard Matthews. I think continues to get pushed down. You know, they drafted a young wide receiver really early. They brought on Eric Decker, but I still think day one, Rashard Matthews and Eric Decker are going to start the wide receiver position. Rashard Matthews is one of their downfield threats. We saw, you know, he's a huge big play guy for Mariota. And I think because he's so cheap, I wasn't excited about him earlier on when, you know, he was going fairly early, but now that he's, you know, going in the 50s, he sort of feels like that downfield threat, sort of big play guy that can get you some 100-yard touchdown type games. So he's a guy I'm starting to buy into, you know, in that 13th, 14th round that he's working his way towards.
That's fair. I have issues. Like, they obviously felt the need to go out and draft a wide receiver at number 5 overall. They obviously felt the need to go get Eric Decker, Jonnu Smith, Delaney Walker still there. Like, there's a lot of questions, but Rashard Matthews has been a player. Like, that's the part that's difficult for me to get over because he's actually been really good. Where I don't know, when the Titans were rumored to and actually funny, Nixon, the one that broke that, he actually mentioned to me, like, so we were talking like a week before that, and he was saying, I heard the Titans are interested. And I was like, why would they be interested? You know, they just drafted Corey Davis, Taywan Taylor. Like, I didn't really see the need for Decker, and I still don't. But at the same, it's never a bad thing to have too many weapons, right? But Rashard Matthews, he just continues to be undervalued. You know, Miami just let him walk, and they ended up signing Kenny Stills, who's, I guess, a similar type player, maybe a little faster. And now he's being forgotten in Tennessee, which kind of sucks. But yeah, I don't think it's a bad pick.
No, I think you're getting, he's sort of an arbitrage Kenny Stills. You know, you're getting the wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 type downfield threat. Mm-hmm. I think the Titans realize that he has a very specific type of role. Matthews cannot be an alpha wide receiver one on a team. No chance. But he can be the guy who's going to come up with 40-yard touchdowns in a game because that's what he does. So I think, and I would throw Ted Ginn in there with him as well, as sort of that guy that you can get with, the long touchdowns in New Orleans. So I think those are guys that, you get those big plays later on. So I'm okay with those kinds of guys late.
For sure. Yeah.
Any other last minute wide receivers that you guys have any thoughts on? If not, we will get out of here.
Oh man, we touched on a lot. It was fun.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah. All right. So I'm just going to say that my fantasy league is sponsoring this podcast. If you have not signed up for any MFL10s, go to MFL10s. That's MFL10s.com and sign up. They're fun. Even if you just want to do a couple of them, they will get you prepped for your redraft leagues, just sort of help you out with ADP. And just remember that it's mostly, us guys on Twitter that are doing these drafts. So we are forming these ADPs. So the ADPs are good. So pay attention, when you're going to your home leagues, if there's stuff that stands out, it's probably a value. Do a couple. If you want to do 100, like, I'm probably going to do, then, pay attention to what, we're saying on here. And then if you want to find the podcast on iTunes, leave us a review. We're going to give out some free credits. We're going to do some listener leagues. So anyone that we've had on the pods will be in those listener leagues. And then if you want to find Mike on Twitter, it's at Mike Tagliere. That's spelled TAGLIERE NFL. Find his work on fantasypros.com. Find Hodge on Twitter at Ryan Hodge. Find me on Twitter at John Proctor DFS. And that's it, guys. Thanks for listening.